Hi, everybody. I think it's time to get started. So thank you for coming to this talk on continuous integration with Windows Azure websites. I think this is going to be a great talk. We have a lot of demos, a lot of things I want to get through today. If you have any questions, please go ahead, raise your hand, chime in. Please come up to one of the mics. This is being recorded, so we'd like it so that everyone can hear it, especially those who watch the video after the fact. And really what this talk is going to be about today is not just continuous integration, but changing the way we think about our software development process and how we take our bits that are working locally and get those into production in a reliable and consistent manner. So before we get into all of that, a little bit about myself. I've been at Microsoft for a little over a year now, and before that I've had various roles from software engineer to dev architect to dev lead, and now program manager working on framework and tools for Windows Azure. Consistently through all of the projects that I've done through healthcare, IT, education, writing the code for me, this tends to be the easy and fun part. It's the part we do first. It's the part we all want to dive in and get involved with. Things like builds and version control and deployment and continuous integration, they really have this tendency to be an afterthought in our software development process. And it's kind of been my experience that the later we think about these things, the more inherently risky our build processes become. The more likely it is that doing a deployment is going to be this scary thing that only Jeff, the build guy, knows how to do, and God help us if he doesn't come into work the day that we need to push out a critical build. Everything that we're going to talk about today is about making sure that if Jeff, the build guy, isn't around, we're going to be all right, and we know that we're sure that we can deploy, it's going to work, it's going to be consistent, and our customers are going to be happy. So when I think about builds and when I think about deployment, especially into the cloud, an environment that I don't necessarily control or know every single aspect of, these are some of the words that I think of. This is a scary thing. It's a risky thing. It's something only one guy knows how to do. We only do it on a Thursday before noon, because if something breaks on a Friday, then we don't want to stay late. All of these kinds of emotions and thoughts come up when we talk about doing builds, especially as we start constructing more complex systems. And this is a very bad thing. The less that we do our builds, the scarier they're going to be. The less automated they are, the more manual they are, the more prone to a human error they're going to be. So how do we take all of these frightening things, all of this risk and unpredictability, how do we take and get rid of that? We do it more. This is exactly the opposite of what a doctor would tell you to do. If it hurts, do it more. You need to take your code, the deployment process that you're doing once a month, once every 6 months, do it every day. What are your nightly builds? What do they look like? Are your nightly builds deploying into a testing environment? Are you running unit tests and test runners in your test environment? What is the makeup? What happens every single night when you go home after you've made a check-in? What happens after every check-in? Are you running all of your tests? The more that we do all of these things and the more that we string these processes together, the more likely we are to, 1, automate them, 2, understand them, and then 3, feel confident when it's time to take these processes and allow them to move our code into actual production. So how we're going to do all this, and now that was a lot of fanfare, what are we actually going to talk about and what are we going to look at today? This is probably the most PowerPoint we're going to see, so hopefully you guys are into demos. We're going to talk about just a basic review of Windows Azure websites, just kind of go into why we use that, how it relates to continuous integration, and specifically in some of these cases, just continuous deployment. We're going to talk about hosted TFS, a new solution that you've probably already heard a lot about today if you're interested in this kind of thing. Some great offerings coming out of a cloud-based version control and even more than that system. Continuous deployment with GitHub and CodePlex. If you're someone that's doing open source work or if you're someone that's involved in private repositories with GitHub or CodePlex, you're going to love this kind of stuff. My guest speaker, Johnny, is going to come on and talk about bringing your own continuous integration. What's it look like if you already have an existing process that you're comfortable with, an existing server, you're using cruise control, and you really want to hang on to that? And then lastly, this is kind of the fun part for me. We're going to talk about custom deployment scripts and how you can take and say, within Windows Azure, how do I really, really lock down and customize the processes in the way that what's going to happen after I deploy my bits into the cloud. So just kind of getting started, a quick overview of Windows Azure websites. Really what it's about is it's just a really easy way to take the bits that I have on my machine, the ASP.NET MVC projects that just works when I hit F5, and taking that project and getting it running in the cloud with no fanfare. That's kind of what this is about. Just to give me an idea of the room, how many of you have used Windows Azure websites, have deployed a site, seen it? Okay, so a good many of you. Good, then you'll see some demos of this in the context of my other presentations, but I won't do something specific for that. So the real win here is I can bring my existing applications. Have any of you done cloud services deployment over the last year? So yeah, that like 10-minute thing now, 3-4 minutes, throw that away. That's gone. You're using web deploy, you're using Git, only pushing the changes. We're going to see deployments happen in a matter of seconds, not a matter of minutes. This supports ASP.NET, PHP, and Node.js right out of the box. Very little configuration needed to take advantage of that. So if you are using other platforms, then it's a nice, Azure is a welcoming cloud for everybody. And then lastly, I think kind of the most important part is taking the existing Windows Azure PaaS services, things like caching, queues, blob storage, service bus, those same things that were available to us inside of cloud services and now from VMs, they're available to Windows Azure websites, and they're just as easy to use from inside of the portal. So really, it's about bringing the difficulty and all the learning curve down so that you can deploy an application into Windows Azure. So leading into that, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is doing continuous integration with Team Foundation Server. This is kind of an interesting part. I would say that TFS is sort of in a new era. We've probably all in this room used TFS at some point or another. And when I think of TFS, the first thing that comes to my mind is version control. Well, today this is really no longer the case. Version control is becoming kind of the easy part. It's a given. If you're not using version control, please do use it. But most people have all fallen in line with that. And now this is no longer, I would say to me, it is almost no longer interesting, right? It's kind of the thing that we know is going to happen. What is interesting is what happens after we check our files in. Are we going to be building the code once it gets checked in? Are we going to try running our unit tests against it? After we run our unit test, how do we notify somebody when something's gone wrong? After we know that we have a good build, where do those bits go? Kind of all the things I opened the presentation with and saying it's more about the overall process than just getting my bits to a specific machine and knowing they're backed up. And really, given that this is kind of the modern problem of software development, this is one of the things that the new hosted TFS is set out to solve and does a fantastic job of doing. So I figured this was kind of a good place to start. So I'm going to kick over to a demo. Excellent, there we go. So this is tfs.visualstudio.com, and this is a hosted TFS solution in the cloud provided by Microsoft. Right now the sign-up is free, so I kind of encourage you, if you're interested in TFS, go play around with this, try it out, see what it's like. You're going to find in many ways the experience is very, very similar to having TFS in your local infrastructure, except that you don't have to manage it. So I've already signed in, and I'm going to go over here to my account. And the server that I've set up is called 42up.visualstudio.com. This is just what I named it many, many months ago when I first signed up for the service. And the first thing you're going to notice is you get a dashboard, a list of all of my recent projects and teams, some information to help you get started, downloads of tools, all of these sorts of things. So this is the landing page. Once you come in, the part that's a little bit more interesting is what happens when you create a new team project. So if you click on this, very simple, create a project, give it a name. Typically, you're going to use a project for an isolated piece of functionality. So in my case, the projects I have set up have a single solution file. Maybe they have a couple of projects, but really we're talking about like an ASP.NET MVC project, a unit test project, maybe a couple of C# libraries, that kind of thing. So instead of creating this, I'm actually going to go into one I've already created. I have a project called NewMap1. So NewMap1 is a project I've already set up. I have a local instance of Visual Studio open, and we'll get into that code in a little bit. First thing you're struck with is a burn down chart. This is not typically something I think of when I think of version control. They're coming in and helping me with my process, making it easier for me to identify the things I'm going to need to move through development. When you look at work, this is my product backlog, list of issues that we have to work on, tasks that I have to complete. Right now this isn't populated, but I can break it out into multiple sprints, kind of help me out with my dev process. Source is, as you would expect, this is the version control piece of things. And you can see that I already have some code deployed into this. I have a solution file. I have a web project. Hopefully, yes, a web project. And I have some unit tests all in there. And I can easily browse through using the web interface and see everything that's been checked in. And then lastly, this is kind of the really cool part. You have build definitions that allow you to build your code, create a pipeline, unit test, and then finally, in the case that we'll see with Windows Azure, deploy those changes into the cloud. So right now, there are no build definitions because I'm just using this for standardized source control. Let's go back to Visual Studio and take a look at the project that I actually have checked in. So I'm going to give this a quick build. So what this is, this project is called a SignalR map. It's a simple ASP.NET MVC project. And all I'm going to do is go ahead and run this. And what this is going to do is it's going to take our current location. It's going to ask the browser, hey browser, what is my current position? And it's actually going to take this and plot it out on a map. So there we go. You notice this is not exactly where we are because one of the built-in pieces that we have is a little bit of randomization to make things interesting. Otherwise, when you test this, all of your pinpoints are going to be in the same exact spot. So let's go ahead and zoom out a little bit just to make this. So you see, yeah, we're pretty far off because it's randomized. So this in and of itself is not interesting, but if we take another tab, put this out over here, we'll see our user count is going to go from 2 to 1, and we can see the point where both of these users were dropped. So this is kind of a neat thing. One of the things I've always wanted to do is have one of these on my website, so that as people visit my site, I can in real time see all the spots where people are coming to visit from. But the content of the talk isn't about SignalR, and it's not necessarily about ASP.NET MVC. It's more about taking this app and deploying it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in, we're going to make a minor change. Right now I have this project called SignalR Map. I'm going to call it SignalR Map, now with TFS. And I'm going to come over to my Solution Explorer, right-click on the solution, and just like we've been doing for years, I'm going to go ahead and check in. Great. So this is a small change, so it'll check in relatively quickly. And while this is happening, it's just a simple case of checking it in. We can go home. You see the Source Control Explorer. The new thing that we're going to see a little bit in a moment is builds. And right now, there's no build definition. So we've made a change, checked it in. Now let's actually set this up so we can deploy it into Windows Azure. So to do that, I'm going to go to manage.windowsazure.com. I'm assuming most of you in the room have been to some of the Azure talks since most of you have seen Azure websites, so I won't spend too much time in here. And I'm just going to go ahead and get started and create a basic Azure website. And we'll call this SignalR Map. Great. So this is going off and creating the site. It should be relatively snappy, at least it has been over the last couple of days. We're created, and we're going to go into the details of that application. We don't have an app in here yet, so there's no metrics. But when you go over into this quick glance section, you're going to see a list of all of the ways that you can deploy into Windows Azure. The first thing you're going to see is TFS, which is what we're about to use. There's Git publishing, which we're going to see a little bit later in the talk. And then there's downloading a publishing profile for those of you who are using the Publish Wizard inside of Visual Studio or Web Matrix. So I'm going to set up TFS publishing. And the first thing it's going to do is ask me for a connection to the TFS server. You'll remember mine was called 42UP. And we're going to connect these two using OAuth. So just like if you were to connect an application to Twitter, Windows Azure and TFS Preview are able to kind of connect to each other using an OAuth workflow. And it makes things nice and easy for this type of work. So this is going to go out, and it's going to populate a list of all of my repositories. So these are all of the TFS projects you saw I had over here, the build, talk, demo project. Ironically, the ones not named build and demo are the ones I'm showing you. And we come back here, and the projects that we had are the same things that are reflected here. So I'm going to select New Map 1 since this is the name of the TFS project I'm using. Great. So this is going to go out. It's going to create the link. And now the first time that we do this, it's going to go out to TFS Preview. It's going to say, hey, I know that you're publishing to Azure. What are some of the things that you're likely to do? We're going to set up a build definition. We're going to make sure your unit tests get executed. We're going to set up publishing so that the bits go directly from TFS into Windows Azure. So this is now linked. The last step that we have to do, the only thing we have to do to kind of push all of this off is make our first check-in. So again, I'm going to say now with TFS and Azure, I'm all about the simple, low-risk changes during a talk like this. And we're going to go back and check in. Small title change. And there we go. Now this time when I do it, I'm going to go back to home. And when I go into my build section, it's going to go out, and you're going to see we have a build definition all of a sudden. That wasn't there before. This automatically got set up for us. So let's go ahead and double-click on that. and the last build we have is completed. Let's go out to the portal and take a look over here. And it looks like I'm running into a little bit of issues right now. This thing is slowing down. So I'll just kind of talk through what's supposed to happen right now when this is working. So what's going to happen is it's going to queue the build. This will all get sent. This will all get built. It'll execute my unit tests and then deploy that into Windows Azure. So we had a little bit of hiccup with this, but I think you guys get the general idea. So this is TFS. That's what we would hope to see. The next thing that we're going to take a look at is we're going to take a look at what it means to deploy using Git, and using, specifically the thing I'd like to talk about is using GitHub. But before we do that, let's go ahead and switch back to the slide deck, which is on 1. Some of the things that we wanted to talk about with TFS before we move on. Tons of new features. The automatic build on a good day is working pretty well. It will execute your run it unit tests, and really with the process that we just saw, it's going to go into Windows Azure as well. So the next thing we're going to talk about is continuous deployment using Codeplex and GitHub. So kind of just to give me an idea of the room, like we did with Windows Azure websites, how many of you have used Git before? Wow, that's great. I really did not know what to expect with this crowd. And really, I think inside of Windows Azure, we're sort of in the same boat. We're kind of putting some tools out there, getting a feel for what the community is asking for. So far, the response has been fantastic. And so we're sort of encouraged and looking to build out more of these tools. And I kind of want to show you some of the newer things that we've been adding. So let's kick over to another demo. Okay, so I have an existing project that's sitting out in GitHub, and I'm going to go ahead out there. This is, again, a map-based application because these are kind of the things that I'm into building right now. And this app happens to be built using Node.js. I'm a web developer, so for me, the transition of going from JavaScript in the client to JavaScript in the server was kind of interesting and fun, and I've been experimenting with it a little bit lately. And this is sort of a learning app that I've been using. So here we have a clone URL. I already happen to have, since many of you are familiar with Git, I already have this repository cloned on my local machine. And just to give you an idea of what it looks like, I have it loaded up inside of Microsoft Web Matrix, one of the editors we're working on that happens to have Node support. So if I go ahead and run this, what you're seeing right now is a real-time visualization of tweets from around the world as they're landing with geolocation enabled. So this is kind of another one of those real-timey type apps that's looking at a bunch of data using WebSockets and XHR pooling to kind of represent a lot of to represent Twitter traffic. You can even zoom in and click on some of these, except it's getting overrun. There we go. We even have a few in Seattle. So the dangerous part in any demo like this is actually clicking one of these and seeing what people on Twitter are really talking about. So I've kind of set this up to have one tweet that we can have a good idea. Oh, there we go. So just a simple tweet, we can click on them, see what people are talking about as they show up in real time. And this is the type of thing that is pretty common to build with Node.js. Kind of these interactive, quick WebSocket-y type apps are its sweet point. So let's go ahead and set this up so that we can run it inside of Windows Azure. Again, I'm going to go to manage.windowsazure.com. I'm going to create a new site once this loads up. Great. And we're going to call this our Twitter map. Great, so this is going off and being created. Again, simple application, nothing fancy, but it's the type of thing that we really don't want to have to deal with too much trouble, something like cloud services would make us do to deploy. So I'm going to go inside of here. Last time we chose TFS publishing. This time, because I'm using GitHub, I'm just going to go ahead and set up using a Git repository. So this is going to go out. It's going to provision a local repository out, or a remote repository out on Windows Azure. And after that happens, it's going to give us several options for the ways that we can actually deploy into that Git repository. Kind of the most common use case people would think of is pushing my local files. So if I wanted to use Git and have Windows Azure as a remote, I could connect and do that. And we're going to see an example of that later. Or if I want to connect using one of these services like Codeplex, Bitbucket, or GitHub, we can set that up as well. So I'm going to choose to use GitHub. Just like we did with TFS, I'm going to authorize using this kind of cool OAuth workflow that'll log in. I've already logged in with the GitHub on my account, so it's linked. And you're going to see all of the GitHub repositories that I have that I could choose from. These are the same things that if you went to my GitHub account, you would see all of these listed. The name of the app that we're going to pick is called Twitter Map. Great. So I'm going to set that up. Automatically, really without me doing anything, Windows Azure just went out to GitHub, cloned the repository with my bits that were running, and is actually taking those bits and then applying them to my site. So when this is done, we're going to get a notification saying that the deploy is complete, and we're going to be able to go ahead and run it. I need to find better filler for the time when the little spinner is going on during these deployment steps. One of the nice things that you'll find as we do this is as you keep making deployments, we'll actually track them and give you the ability to move back and forth, roll back, all those sorts of nice things. So good, this is now our active deployment. Now I'm just going to warn you, there's going to be an error. This time it's on purpose. We're going to click run, and the site's going to fail to execute. So if we take a look at the error, the exception that we're going to get is the config must provide a consumer key. So I was using the Twitter API for this app. So to use the Twitter API, you have to use Twitter keys. Now, the keys that I use for Twitter, these are for my application and my application alone. So the last thing I want to do is check these into GitHub, where they are publicly available. These are private, kind of sensitive information, but I need them to be able to run my site. So how are we going to do that? If we go back to Web Matrix, we can take a look at these keys. These are kind of injected as private variables in my site, and I don't want these to be publicly available. So what we can do is we can go to Windows Azure. We can go into our app. We can go into the configuration section, and we have the capability to inject both connection strings and application settings that are just going to be private to our application. If you're doing anything that uses private keys, say passwords for connection strings, like a Twitter API key, an Instagram API key, this is really the way that you want to go about it. And so just real quickly here, we're going to go through, and I'm going to copy these out. And after this is done, we're just going to have to issue a save. And then with a little bit of luck, auto-magically, our site is going to start working. Great. So we're updating our configuration. Those environment variables now are going to get injected into my running app. As I mentioned down here, you could also do connection strings this way if you want to keep your connection strings secure and out of source control. And now when we go to browse to the site, we're going to see that those keys are going to get used, and we're getting all of our awesome Twitter traffic. And we're wondering what's up with me in Bing Maps. It's been kind of my new fun thing to do. So this is an example. So we've kind of taken two different directions. We took the TFS preview direction of kind of having my private source control that I might have on-premise and transferring that online. We've looked at using Git with something like GitHub. Kind of the next question that we're going to have is, what happens if I don't want to use that and I already have an existing process? So before we go into that, just in review, we used Git to deploy. That was really, really, really easy to set up. If I would have done a Git push, it would have gone to GitHub and automatically deployed again. And it's great for open source projects. If you're doing something where you just want to check in and you don't care and you just want it to automatically fly out, this is kind of a great solution for continuous deployment. So like I mentioned, the next question is, what happens if I have an existing workflow? Let's say that I'm using cruisecontrol.net. I don't want to use this method. I'm using something like TeamCity, or I'm using non.NET technologies. I don't want to use your MS Build. I want to do my own thing. You want custom rich experiences, so you already have a set of modules plugged up that do very, very specific actions. And you want to have some consistency on cloud or on-premise. Then there's another option, and Johnny here from Murally is going to come up, and he's going to talk about the way that his company went and implemented some of these options. So I'm going to hand it over to Johnny.
Well, so I guess I click here to go back to the thing. So thanks, Justin. Thanks, everyone, for being here. So I'm Johnny from Murally. Murally appeared yesterday on the keynote. We did some stuff on Cloud Cover. You might seen it. If not, just check the Cloud Cover stuff that we've done. So Murally is this app that you're seeing. It's a big wall where you can drag and drop content and bring stuff from the web. I will use it to give the presentation. This is a running app. You'll see that we are running the proper URL. So what I would do first, considering what Justin just said at the beginning, that you have to do it often. You have to. All the recorded will send me emails spamming. Wrong mail. And this guy doesn't know his password. I'm trying to take over my own account. So we have our Jenkins build server, which is hooked up to GitHub. We use the same auth because we already have all the permissions set in there for the teams and all that. So the first thing that I would do for this app that is running in production is come here where it says master, which is our master branch, and I run a build. I'll start the build. I will redeploy the full app right now while we are talking. To give you a little bit of context, Murally is a startup. We started up. We launched September 10 on TechCrunch. We went from 500 to 25 to more than 20,000 users in a month. We have users from all over the world that might be accessing the site while I'm building it. We have support for iPad, Surface, and all that, so you can check it out. So a little bit on story on continuous deployment. Our app has gone through more than 1,300 versions. Yes, more than 1,300 versions. We are deploying all the time every little minor change that we consider that will make a better experience for our users. So from that, like hand drawing thing up to a product that you're watching right now on the screen, there are 1,300 deployments, like the one that I just fired. So it will be like around 1,301. So we learned a lot of things along the way. We started doing this really, really, really often. So I guess that Sari, as part of the keynote, he said that we do around 20 deployments. So obviously, we're using Windows Azure websites, as Justin said, because if you're familiar with the cloud service deployment, you know that 20 deployments per day will be the full day. You'll spend the full day sitting there waiting for it to deploy. So we are doing 20 deployments using the Windows Azure websites. We are running a business. So this is something interesting. We are doing continuous deployment. It's really cool. We are a startup. We are 10 people. We have a product manager. We have that is also like really committed to this. Why? Because we are measuring everything. We keep all those charts, and we keep our own mural. We are dog fooding, doing that to understand what's changing between deployments. So we keep a really fast-paced deployment, but we are also running a business. So we try to understand what happens between. We create these matrices that says like, okay, I have an hypothesis that says that if I change this color, it will improve the conversion rate by the 20%. We check that in, we try it out, we measure, and we deploy. It's not that we say like, okay, by the release that we're going to do on November 13, 2013, we will change the color and see what happens. It's like, we have that hypothesis right now, we go and do the change. So to go a little bit in depth in the technical piece, I'll just refresh. It's completing. So it's the 1,395 deployments. We are really close to 1400. So before we jump a little bit farther, I have a broken image. We are using GitHub as Justin just showed. We have our own private organization, which is Merely. We are using Jenkins, which is a build server that I just showed you. And we are deploying to Windows Azure. So what happens since I click that button or I do a check-in up to when I have a new version of the app running? So basically what we do is Merely is a Node.js app. Most of it is written on the client side. But we have Node.js backend that handles like 90,000 requests per hour. So it's a pretty intensive, IO-intensive app. We grab all those Node.js unit tests, run them. We then run the Closure compiler. We started before the TypeScript and all that, so we were using the Google Closure compiler. We use it for the CSS, and we use it for the actual JavaScript code. So we have typed, annotated JavaScript. We check that everything is in place. That's another step on our process. Then we run the YUI compressor, just inline the HTMLs and all that, make sure that the app runs fast. We are big fans of page speed, Y slow, and all that. So we try to keep our score high there. We just ship everything. We upload all our assets to S3. We are moving to the Azure storage thing, but right now we are using S3 and the CloudFront. So we bundle everything. We bundle all our JavaScript and CSS. We have more than 100 files on the JavaScript client side. We end up having just one, and we end up having out of 30 CSS, we have just one. And we do a git push, and it goes straight to Azure. So doing this, I'll double check in here. So we have done the version 1395. So if I navigate to the site, while I was speaking, I will show you. This is a trick to be able to know which version we are running. That says on the response, on the headers, we have which version of Merely we are running. We end up needing to do this because of many versions that we were running. We needed to know which version you were serving. This Merely, once it's loaded and once you sign up, it's just a single page app. You can have it open for days. So we just wanted to keep our versions aligned. So from what I said that we're doing and all that, there are when I was chatting with Justin, what can I say? These are the greatest 10 things that we've learned along the way doing continuous deployment for these months that we've been running the company this way. So the first one is choose a build platform you like. If you are in the .NET world, there is this TeamCity. You can use TFS. You can use Jenkins that runs also on Windows. It runs on Windows and on Mac. We actually have our Jenkins that I just showed you is hosted on a VM, on a Windows Azure virtual machine on Unix. It's using an Ubuntu build. We are running, you're going to be running Travis. I'm a really big fan of Travis CI. I don't know if you've heard about that. It's hosted CI, plus they have a really cool API if you're using GitHub that will tell you which commit is good to go. It will fire builds for each commit, and you can do a lot of crazy stuff there. It's really advanced. But the first lesson learned is you have to go and pick a platform that you like. It's like a matter of love and hate. You see it, you like it, you stick to it, it will be like your best friend. So the second thing that we've learned is use Git-based Windows Azure deployment or TFS or whatever. Use the version control. Avoid the web deploy or the FTP kind of thing. Why? You will want rollback. If you are doing this, it will be hey, we screw up. Just go back. It won't be a matter of hey, I will have to rerun the build again and come back and see. It's like you go there, you step on the commit that you like, double click, roll back, you're back. You're safe. The third one would be like run the same build for every environment you run your app in. This is like really, really, really important. Like we have 3 major environments besides our dev machines and the things that we do. We run staging, production, and an experimental environment where we have like new features that we are coming that we will merge eventually into a platform, but we want some users to test it, stuff like that. We have the same build process, exactly the same build process for all of them. Why? First, you wanted to test your build process. It's as important as your code. So it's something that you have to test it before. So if there is something that we need to change, I will go and change it on staging, run the staging deployment, see that everything is going fine, then go to production. So this is more like a consider your build process as a living and breathing thing. It's not like, we'll just use it for production. Use it for everything because you have to maintain it. So try to put it on the same product cycle that you do with your own product. And this is a little bit controversial considering what Justin just said. Do not go straight to the cloud. Like you don't want to do that. Like really, it's not that you don't want to go straight to the cloud. Well, except for TFS, the one that he shows that runs unit test and all that. It's like if you enter in this like continuous deployment world and you configure to go straight from GitHub to your own repo, you'll probably have like no 1,300 builds. You'll have like 13,000 builds because you'll be breaking it every little check-in. We put these contention nets like the unit test, the closure compiler. When the full process ends, we just fire up a new like a hosted Selenium unit tests that do kind of a health check to check that even though we run the closure compiler, the unit test, and all that, make sure that the app is doing what it's supposed to do on the client side. So you don't want to go straight to cloud. There are some new cool things that Justin will show you that are like, yeah, you can go straight to the cloud now. But when we were thinking about this, it's like put something in between. Like start with a little process. No matter if it's just like doing like a hop in Git pushes. Like you send it somewhere and then you do Git push again. Doesn't matter. Put something and start growing it with time. You would like to run minification. You would like to upload static assets to the blob store. You would like to do plenty of all other things. Compile your code, run your tests, and all that. And if you are so used to go straight from your repo to the cloud, you'll end up messing up. So you don't want to do that. This is really important if you're not. The fifth one is like have your team, all your team, on the same tools. This is key for XPlat teams. We know that the Mac fanboys are like really popular these days, so there are a lot of devs that are going like, hey, I have my Mac. But there are a lot of people that still using Windows. If you're doing a Node app, you would really like using like Webmatrix. If you're a Visual Studio guy and you like IntelliSense, that's your thing. Like I haven't seen anything that does the same for Node.js. So you'll be running on Windows. You'll have people running on Mac. You might even have some 1 out of 100 that runs an Ubuntu machine or something like that. So you want to have everybody on the same tools. It could be either like Jake, Grunt. Grunt is a Node base. Rake is the one that is based on Ruby. Jake and Bake are like Node based too. So you need to choose something that you will be sure that you can run across multiple platforms. Because if you have devs on Windows and they cannot run your CI stuff or your like build scripts, then they will end up checking in many times broken things because they cannot run the test because they are written on a make file that doesn't run on Windows. So this is really important. Avoid using either this is only for Windows or this is only for Mac or this is only for Unix. Use something that you make sure that works across all the things. The sixth one is like keep it really fast, like under 3 minutes. we started out doing merely started on Google App Engine. We had like 20-minute deployment time for a Java app. That was like what forced us to move forward. Like we didn't want like, hey, I will do this check-in that took me 5 minutes, and then I'll have 400% of that time that took me to push the fix to wait and see that the app is already published. So keep it fast and make sure that you know that it's broken. When it's broken, you have to have all your team to know that it's broken. Use a quick. I know that there are cool things that you can do to notify people that their videos are broken. So it's something that you should do. There is a story of the office that had like the siren, like the police one that will run if the bill is broken. So you have to do something like that. Another thing that we've learned is like have a health check, like run the build or a test or something every once in a while, many times a day. Like it will depend how long does it take to run your health check. Maybe it's 12 hours, so you can do it like twice a day. But ours takes 5 minutes. We run like every hour. Like you go there, do a sign up, do a sign in, test that the widget dragging is working, and all that. It's what keeps us safe that the app is running. So we leverage the same infrastructure that we put in place for build to do this. The number 8 is critical. Do it from day one. Like when we started, it was like a manual deployment. And then from like day one, it was day 0, day 1, we have a CI in place. Doesn't matter if you are just a prototype. Like, are you using just HTML and vanilla JavaScript to like, hey, this is how my landing page will look like, then have it automated. Take the time there. If you're a startup, you should already be doing that. If you're thinking of building a startup, this is the first thing that you need to build. Why? Because when the business is running and you start getting users and you start getting like crowded, you don't have time to spend like, hey, I will tweak how it will be if we just ship all this stuff. Like you'll be running with the app. While your app is hot, you don't have time. So
especially when you're busy here giving talks.
Right. Right. So if you want to come here and give a talk, you should have this already set in place so you can go there and every once in a while, like write another build. Yeah, many times a day just to keep it healthy. I already spoke about this, is know which version of the app you are serving and which version of the app are your users using. So we track all our front-end interactions using KISS metrics. Every interaction is also marked with a version. Like we said, hey, this session started on version 1300, but our backend is 1400. So if there is a bug, we can look back on the logs and say, yeah, he was running a client version that it's outdated. That's why he hit that bug. We have another thing that is we use this to enforce some refresh. Like we use semantic versioning, semver.org, to keep the track of the app. So if we change anything but the build, like if we increase the minor or the major version of the build, it will fire up a refresh of the app. It will say like, hey, you're running an outdated thing. There are minor bugs, most of them, or minor changes like new typography, new backgrounds and stuff like that, that doesn't need the user to refresh, because if you're using the tool and it's working for you, we don't need to refresh that. That will work. But if we change the persistent mode or we change the data model, we need a way to, hey, we need to restart all the clients. So we keep all our requests, all our outgoing requests with a version. And every ongoing request from the client has also the version in it. So we say, hey, 409, conflict. You're running an old version. We refresh and you keep going. Regarding versions, the other stepping stone that we have is tag your code. Like, hey, we have 1358. When I took the screenshot, now we will have 1399. I will share with you the 1400 moment, I hope. So we have 1400 tags. Why? Because tags are free, mostly. Like it takes it takes just a pointer to a commit, but it will give us the date, the proper date when something happens. So we check the version on the client, we check the version on the server, we know which time we make that deployment, and make sure that we have all the dates and all the traceability for everything. The last part, and the most important one, is like, you have to relax and be proud of every single deployment you've done. It's like, if I wasn't so proud of it, I wouldn't be here speaking about it, and I wouldn't be running it as many times while I'm speaking. We have a product that is in production, right? We have 20,000 users, we have people hitting the site, we have peaks of 500 concurrent users throughout the day, and I'm doing builds. So I don't care. It's like we took the dramatism of, hey, I have to put a new version in production, and turn it into, hey, there is this funny guy stepping in here and doing click just to generate deployments. That's like, when you're all set with that, when you're like happy with your build process and you feel confident, it's like, hey, there is no longer a dependency on Justin, which is the guy that knows how to build things and put it on the internet. Because if he's sick, or if he wants to take his month on Hawaii, that's fine. I mean, we'll keep deploying. It's fine. So let's see that it should have change. So I will show you here pretty quick on the XHR that we're doing requests to the versions that we are deploying, just to make sure that I'm not lying. So we have here, we are running the version 98, so 99 should be building right now. So as you've seen, it's a matter of minutes. So we have here, this is the tests that are passing, so we are good. In reality, I run it like many times to wipe the full red ones, so you see here and it's like, hey, these guys are awesome. But but if you take a look at this, like, we are always under 3 minutes. In fact, if the app is not crowded and the deployment takes like seconds, we are under 2 minutes. So now remember when I said, like, do not go straight to the cloud because you want to do all that stuff. Justin will show you like why you can go straight to the cloud, and it will be really, really fun to do it. So,
right. Thanks a lot, Johnny.
When we do questions, we can
do after. We're getting kind of pressed for time. So the last thing, as Johnny was alluding to, going straight from GitHub into Windows Azure, this is a fun demo. This is something that's nice to show. But there are probably a couple of things you should do in between. You want to do things like possibly you want to run your unit tests. You want to do minification. Maybe you want to apply SQL upgrade scripts. There are all sorts of kind of interesting steps that you may need to do in between these transitions, and you want to do them in an automated fashion. So what the next part of this talk is going to be about is how we take the process of checking into GitHub and apply, checking in via Git, and apply a lot of the same things Johnny is doing with Jenkins, a full automation server, and do them in kind of a lightweight ad hoc fashion inside of Windows Azure. So again, we're going to go back to demos. And I'll leave this up so that we can check it later. And for this demo, we're going to start with a project that I just have running locally on my machine. So this is an image sharing site, again, ASP.NET MVC with a unit test project. You might start to notice a pattern. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly build this. This is taking advantage of blob storage and table storage. It's a true kind of cloud-based application, and it's going to let users share photos back and forth kind of in an Instagram sort of way, if you will. So I'll go ahead and launch this site. Wow. And we're up and running, and you see we already have a couple of images up here inside of the app. So the idea is that I can take something like this. I can also take another client. So let's go ahead and run this actually in an iPhone. Why not?
Sorry, I'm not sure what you said.
And the idea is that I can take pictures like this and drag them out. So as I go ahead and I do this, we're going to actually update multiple clients all at the same time in real time, just kind of a happy little ASP.NET, MVC, and SignalR kind of demo that works locally, and taking advantage of Blob and Table. So kind of a neat little cloud-based application, the type of thing that you might see built by Johnny's company using Node, but we're using ASP.NET to do it. So let's go ahead and set this up, and instead of doing something on GitHub, this is going to be my business. I'm going to be like Instagram. I'm going to make $1 billion. So I don't want to share my source code in a public repository, and I'm just going to go ahead and do this locally. So over here, and you guys mentioned you were familiar with Git. You can see I have a working Git repository, and I'm actually going to go ahead, and I know this sounds crazy, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this just to show you from scratch. Recurse force.git. There we go. So we know after this we no longer have a Git repository. So if I do git status, there's no repository. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back and we're going to start from the Azure portal. And I'm going to create a new site just like we've done with the other demos. Quick create. And we're going to call this one PhotoR. Great. So this is going to go out and create. When it comes back around, we're going to set up the Git repository. But the thing we're going to do a little bit different this time is instead of hooking up to GitHub, we're just going to go ahead and use the repository that's running inside of Windows Azure. So set up Git publishing, and we're going to go off and create that. When this comes back around, it's going to give us some details for how to get connected with the site and how to use Git. And we're going to use that to initialize our repository and deploy our code. Perfect. So this is the remote. So this is the remote of the Git server that's running inside of Windows Azure. I'm going to go ahead and do a git init. So I'm going to initialize the repository. I'm going to add all of my files. Now, in the real world, I would probably go out and I would add a .gitignore file to make sure that everything doesn't get deployed. And then I'm going to commit my list of changes. I'm going to call this the initial commit. Great. So I have a local repository. I have all of my changes committed. The one thing I'm lacking is a remote. So to actually tie this into Windows Azure, I'm just going to say git remote add. We're going to call it Azure as the name of the remote. And I'm just going to go ahead and paste in this URI that was given to me. Once I do this, I'm now ready to publish to the cloud. So just a couple of commands. I can say git push. I'm going to push to the remote that we just created called Azure, and I'm going to use the master branch. This is probably a good opportunity to talk about another point that Johnny brought up about not deploying straight from source control. One of the things we've added is now the capability to pick a different branch. So if you want to check into main inside of your Git repository in GitHub, but really what you want is you only want to push a new deployment out of, say, a deployment branch, that's something you can set up now as well. So you don't need to do for every commit issue a push to Azure if that's not how you want to do it. So great, we're all set up. We should probably talk about a couple of the things that happened. So interesting, you see we pushed this and it went out and it pushed our code. It ran MS build and deployed all of my missing NuGet packages automatically and installed them. It transformed my web.config to use the web.cloud.config. It took all of my files that were in a temp directory finally and copied them over into the production directory. And this all just kind of happens automatically by the process we use inside of Azure to deploy your files. So let's go ahead and launch this just to kind of see it. And you can see it's now the active deployment. I need to get to the screen quick enough so you can see the spinny. I'm going to go ahead and launch it. And with a little bit of luck, after the first time start, we're going to see our app is up and running in Windows Azure with the git push. So there we go. And because we used blob storage and table, all the images are still available. So I'm just going to get rid of that. So now the interesting question you have to ask is, well, what happens if we want to do something custom in this process? In my case, as he mentioned, maybe I want to run minification. I want to get a notification when something happens. How do I take the process of executing MS Build and kind of that whole pipeline of events and control that myself? And that pipeline looks very different for ASP and from Node. And you could make it different for PHP for that matter. So one of the new features that we've added is actually the ability to customize the deployment. So I have this kudu scripts directory that has a .deployment file. We'll take a look at this in a moment. And all of this code, by the way, is available on GitHub. And I'm going to put a .deployment file in the root of my ASP.NET site. So this is the site where our Git repository lives. And we now have a .deployment file. When you do a git push, the first thing we're going to look for after we receive your files is this .deployment file. If this exists, we're going to say, stop that process of executing MS build, stop that process of copying all the things. We're taking over and we want to do our own thing. And in this case, what I'm choosing to do is I'm saying, instead of doing that, please run this batch script that I have over here. And largely, you're going to see it's actually going to do many of the same things. So let's take a look at this batch script. Great. So just kind of step by step. When we did our push, one of the other things that happens inside of Windows Azure is that we will go and we will auto-magically pick the project file that you're using. We're working to bring some of that and make it kind of available to these scripts, but right now I'm just going to manually specify my project file. We're going to say a release because we're going to set the release mode because we want to use a release build. And then finally, when you deploy this, there are kind of three pieces that are interesting. There's where my source is one directory after I did my git push. There's a temp directory where I MS build into, where I'm going to push my files into and transform them and do any modifications. And then finally, there's the actual target directory, which is where the runtime of my site really lives. And this is where files are being served from. The other thing, and right now I have this commented out, you'll notice, is that let's say you want to run unit tests in line before you do your build. You could add an XUnit unit test project and execute that from the command line in the same way that you would do this on your local machine. And it's going to work. And if it fails, you exit with a non-zero code and you stop the deployment. So these are the types of scenarios that we're trying to help people enable. And you're going to see a lot more contributions we're going to have to these scripts to show you how to do some of the common patterns. So lastly, we kind of identified some of those environment variables. Now there's the interesting part. We're going to run MS build. So you can see here, this is just like doing from the command line, running MS build. And then we're going to copy our files from that temp directory into the target directory. And at the end of the day, really, this is going to end in doing nothing different. This is kind of the beginning of what we did. From here, you would build this out to do your own things. So let's go ahead and see an example of this running. The other thing that you'll notice is that we kind of have just so that you know that it's a little bit different. Oops. We have a message that says we're using the deployment script. So I'll just put that in here. Deploy using custom batch file complete. So now when I do a git status, really the only thing we changed was the deployment file, but that's OK. I'm going to add. I'm going to commit. And I'm going to push. And now after the files are received, you're going to see it's going to kick off this whole process. So now at this point, we're inside of my script. You can tell because I didn't turn off warnings inside of my MS build flag. You can see it's a little bit different. And then at the end, you can see we have the message right here that says, I deployed using a custom batch file. So this is all well and good. If you wanted to build this out using batch files, you could do that. But for me, as I mentioned before, and as I'm sure you're going to fall into the same boat, I'm a web developer kind of by trade. And what I'm really comfortable with is I'm comfortable with JavaScript. And for a scripting language, I find that some of these common tasks, like minification, I want to use Grunt, I want to use Uglify.js, I want to use less compilers that are built in JS. All these things are kind of already out there. So the other option you have is to actually run a Node script, a Node.js script using JavaScript instead of doing a batch file. So let's take a look at what this would actually look like. The first thing we're going to do is modify our .deployment file to say instead of running this script, I have a script called node, and then it's deploy.js. And then in this kind of list of scripts that are available on GitHub, I now have a Node directory, and we have kind of a pre-built stub for a Node app that'll do sort of the same thing. For those of you who are familiar with Node.js, this should look instantly familiar. It's just a collection of a couple of requires. I'm using some third-party modules. In the same way that we did with the batch file, we're going to identify where the CS project file is. One of the things that's interesting in both of these that gets passed in is you have access to environment variables that tell you about the environment that you've created. So in this case, it's going to tell us what's the deployment target, what's the temp directory, all these directories that we talked about before. Those are injected as environment variables into the script. So this is marginally interesting when you think about it as just getting a couple of paths. But what makes this really cool is that your connection strings and your private keys that we talked about earlier that you could configure inside of the website, those get passed as environment variables into this as well. So if you want to do something like, say, run a custom SQL script on your database, you can pass the connection string in and actually execute it from here. And this is kind of one of the types of examples that we're going to be building up in the future. So just to kind of go over what this code is going to do, ultimately, I have it set up to do a series of steps. We're going to build, we'll minify, we're going to copy over to the new directory, and then at the end, we're going to send a completion message. So first step, we're really just going to shell out to MS Build on the machine using Node. We're doing a little bit more error handling in this case. When it's done, we're going to say that we exited with an exit code and call back so that we can go to the next step. The next step is minify. If we had more time, I was going to actually implement the uglify step, but we're about at the end, so I'm not going to have time to do that. We're going to copy, again, using those environment variables from one directory, using xcopy from one directory to the next. You could also use an npm recursive file copying module for this, but I chose to go out to xcopy. And then finally, we're going to send out a little message telling us if it was a success. Now, in the event that MS Build failed, I'm also, you can see here, sending out a message telling us that it failed, because ultimately I want to know that that happened. So once again, we're going to go back. I'm going to do the status. The only thing we changed was the deployment file to point to this script. We're going to add. We're going to commit. And we're going to push. This is going out, pushing the file, same thing. Oh, I know exactly what mistake. I made this mistake actually in somebody's office yesterday. Apologies, the .deployment file, we need to actually call Node instead of just self-executing it. And we're going to start to push. There we go. So we're executing MS Build again, this time from inside of a Node app. We have the message that says we're minifying, we're exiting well, and then finally we're sending out a request to let you know this will send a text message that's going to let us know that the build was complete. Let's hope that my cell coverage works out. Oh no, it must be too many cell phones in the room. But I mean, this is the basic gist of the types of things that we want to let you do. Really kind of take a customized process and let you put it in your hands and change what's going to happen with your deployment process. So thanks a lot.